Hey everyone, welcome to Homespun. This week we're going to be talking to Sara Delaney. Sara, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. We have spent some time together in the past, but I'm glad that we'll be able to sit and chat.
Yeah.
And that everyone can learn a little bit more about you.
I'm really happy to be on Homespun. This is fun, Misty.
Yeah, so how about tell everyone your background?
Sure. Non-traditional work path. You graduate high school, you have an idea, you think you know what you're going to do with your life. It goes a little sideways, you try a bunch of stuff, and by the time you're almost 50, you're like, oh, okay, I think I figured out this adulting thing. So I had a very artsy-fartsy high school, home ec, chorus, music, drama,
Yeah, that
all
was
of
your
that
love.
stuff. Yes. And I went off to college for theater. I went to Hofstra on Long Island.
Oh my gosh.
And I started working in the costume shop for my work study. And I was like, oh, this is a thing.
Yeah.
Like, this part of the theater I really like. I mean, in home ec, and I'd been sewing for years and making clothes. You know, when you're little, you make Barbie clothes out of whatever scraps of fabric you can
whatever
find.
you can get your hands on.
Yeah. But that, working in that costume shop for me was just like an eye-opener to the magic that fabric can have in any setting.
Yeah.
And so that kind of stuck with me, and I thought about going to FIT or Parsons, and I was like, I don't really want the pressure of all of that. So I'll just kind of do my own thing. And then my husband and I ended up moving to Georgia while he was pursuing his degree. And so I sort of took the back seat. Like, I worked in a lot of retail jobs.
Yeah, as you do.
Like you do,
Yeah.
pay the bills. We came back home, we had our family, and somewhere along the line, when my girls were little, I think right around when everything crashed in 2008, like, we had a really hard financial year, and the holidays were coming up, and we just didn't have the funds for gifts.
Yes.
And I was like, I think I have a bin of yarn somewhere from a blanket that I was making in high school or
And
college.
didn't finish.
I think I can do something with that.
Yeah.
So I made hats and scarves for everybody that year, and then my hands just didn't stop.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
I just couldn't stop. And so I did some more retail work. I worked at a major retailer, book retailer for years, and I started a knitting group there. And someone in that knitting group was like, hey, this local yarn shop I work at is hiring. Do you maybe want to come work there? And so I interviewed, and that was 18 years ago.
Wow.
And
Step
so,
one of
yeah,
many.
so yarn has pretty much been my life for the last 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And now you teach and design, and that is your whole world.
Yeah. Somewhere in the middle of all of that, I went back to school
Okay.
for my education degree, and I thought I was going to teach kids because I was like, I have my kids. I love my kids.
Right.
It'll be great. And I got in a classroom with kids, and I don't like kids.
Oh. I always say I really like my kids, but maybe not everyone else's.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true either, but just in smaller doses.
That was a difficult realization for me, was, okay, I don't really like kids. I really like my kids, but kids en masse, not so much.
Well, exactly. And I think it's probably better that you realize that and changed than stay in there and not enjoy it.
Yeah. So then that shifted my degree path a little bit, and I went and worked on curriculum development.
Okay.
Which really lent itself well to the teaching of crochet and knitting, because there isn't a textbook to teach somebody how to knit or teach somebody how to crochet. So it helped me to develop what I needed to teach people how to do what I love,
Right.
which is play with yarn.
And to be able to share that with the world.
Yeah.
I love that. So now that you do this full time, what does your day-to-day look like?
Honestly, it's kind of fun. Right? I get to think about yarn, and I get to buy yarn, and I get to play with yarn, and I get to design with yarn. So, I mean, there's a lot of administrative stuff in the middle of all of that. So there's a lot of desk time, and there's meetings, and there's phone calls. But a good chunk of my time is really just thinking about the stuff that I really like. I mean, you get to do this
Yes.
too with quilting.
Absolutely.
And it's, some people ask, you know, but if it's your passion, if it's what you like, don't you kind of hate that it's your job? And there are days where it's tough.
Yes.
Because it's the part of the job that I don't love the best. But most days it's really just fun.
Yeah, I agree. And it would be lying to say there aren't hard days.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, why did I decide to make this hobby a profession? But at the end of the day, when you sit down and you're like, what else would I be doing?
Right. You could be working some other corporate job 8 hours a day and then be like, where do I fit what I like into my life?
Exactly.
Where it just is our life.
It's very fortunate, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I feel very lucky to do it. It sounds like you do too.
Yeah, it's a blessed place to be in when your work is what you love.
Absolutely. And I think that it does take some balance of saying, like, what am I capable of today? How do I make sure that I still have time to be creatively fed myself?
Yeah.
And also do the work that needs to be done. So are there things that you do in order to find that balance?
I'd love to say yes, but no.
Really? Yeah.
No. My hands almost never stop. And so they're always making something.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that differs between, you know, when you're creating things and when I'm creating things. I can be on an airplane. I can be sitting watching TV.
And still be doing it.
I can be sitting at the dinner table afterwards talking with, you know, my husband and my sister and her husband on our Friday night dinners, and my hands are still going.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so like my samples get made a little bit easier because I don't always have to carve out the time for it.
Yeah.
And then that leaves my active working time open for what's next, you know, sketching and thinking and designing, and then all of the admin of working behind the scenes. So it helps that these babies sort of run on autopilot sometime.
Yeah, rock stars. Just going nonstop. I love that. So what does the design process look like for you? How do you come up with your designs?
So this goes back to when I worked in that costume shop at Hofstra. It was run by an amazing woman named Deirdre McGuire, who designed all of the costumes for all of the productions on campus. And there were, I think I remember 3 different theaters, and each theater did like 4 to 5 productions per season. And she was originally an artist who sort of fell into costume design. And so she would paint these panels of every costume that she wanted to see, and then she'd find fabric swatches that would fit. And so that really unknowingly at the time informed my design process. So it's always a visual idea for me at first, and I am not a paper artist. I don't draw well, but I can draw shapes and I can add the colors in, and then that's enough for me to start thinking about, all right, then how do I actually make my stitches turn into this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, and it's interesting, just having this conversation has kind of triggered a memory for me, I guess, and that costume making when my kids were young is kind of what got me back sewing. Because I wanted to make their Halloween costumes. I thought that seemed really fun, and I learned quickly as I was doing that the details are really what make the magic of the costume. And so I carry a lot of that into my design as a quilter. Do you see the same thing when you're designing for knit and crochet?
Yeah. So there's a lot of having, you know, worked in that costume shop and made a lot of my clothes in the early years. And I made a lot of clothes for my girls when they were babies, because it's easy when they're small.
Yes, less fabric.
They don't argue so much about what you make.
Yeah.
That I approach knit and crochet designs as if they are fabric constructions.
Yeah.
So in my brain, I'm making the fabric pieces that I would have cut out to sew together. So I really, even just the accessories, even simple things, my brain is approaching them in terms of garment construction.
That's really fascinating. I would have never considered that, but you and Tian that I talked to earlier both mentioned it as fabric, and I would have not made that connection otherwise. And I think you're right. That's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a textile.
You're just doing the entire work to make that fabric as well, and we get to skip that step a little bit on the quilting side. But it's incredible. It's really incredible, and I think that the freedom that you have in order to to design from nothing and make exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Is really
although
cool.
I mean there's a journey to that.
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah. You know, I mean, just like when you learn how to sew and you learn how to quote, the simple things that you learn at first, and you learn more complicated as you feel ready for it.
Absolutely.
Some people dive right in. My daughter's 3rd grade teacher learned how to knit by making an Icelandic sweater, because that's what the lady that taught her was making. And she's like, I'm not going to do anything special. This is what I'm making. This is what you're making.
Wow.
Most people don't start with Icelandic sweaters. It's a simple scarf.
That is very difficult.
Yeah.
Well, and for me, as I love all fiber arts, I get sucked into anything that is soft and pretty, and I can, touch it and feel it and love it. That is totally my world. But I have struggled with finding my path in knitting and crochet. And I don't know if it's just not my first love or what the issue is there, but like I am constantly in the middle of projects there, and then I feel overwhelmed by them.
Oh.
So do you have a secret? It's just that your hands never stop. Is that it?
My hands never stop. It's sort of like my anxiety meds. Like this is what calms me down. I think it's probably a combination of the space in your life and the right project to really spark your interest. Like there's a lot of really nice things out there and you're like, oh yeah, that's a cute scarf. I can make that scarf. Mm-hmm. But if you're losing interest in it in the middle of it, then it's just a nice scarf. Yeah. It's not,
you love it so much.
That's the scarf. I have to make that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're just not there yet. It's all right. You're a knitter. But you just haven't found the project that has fully pulled you into that world.
I think that must be right, because there's so many things, and like I said, I can gaze at yarn all day, I guess is what I'm saying. But I am not one that likes to have a lot of unfinished projects. So then that's been a challenge for me in my life, to just have these that I'm like, oh, how do I come back to that?
So you're a project person. So there's two kinds of people. There's project people and there's process people.
Okay.
And so the project people are, my brain can encompass this project and I have to work on it from start to finish. I'm not going to be happy unless my level of perfection is achieved in creating this project. I'm a process person.
Okay, explain.
I'm just like, I'm just gonna make a thing. I get halfway through it, I'm like, I learned something with this, but I also don't really like it.
Move along.
Yep.
You know what? I like that. I like that. I think you're spot on though. I think I am a project person. I see that in my life quite often. I have something that I'm designing or something that I'm working on, and it's always that end goal that I'm moving towards, and it has to do with that finished project.
Yep, so. And like that's your focus until you get to the end of it, and then you can move on to the next thing. Yeah. I probably have 100 started things.
And it doesn't bother you?
No, not at all.
That sounds very freeing, I'll be honest.
Sometimes things sit in project purgatory for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then I'll take them out and go, oh, that's where that is. I'm ready to finish that now.
But they're not just like calling to you like, look at me, remember me over here.
Nope.
You're feeling bad.
Nope. No, because every project for me, it's a learning process.
Yeah.
And so if all I learn from this project is that I don't enjoy it, that's a lesson learned.
It's enough, yeah.
Put it aside. And the great thing about yarn is that it is almost infinitely reusable.
That is so true.
It drives my husband batty when I pull things apart. But carpenter, works in wood. I'm like, wouldn't you like to be able to uncut that wood and have your 2x4 again and start over? And it boggles him. He can't wrap his head around it. He has to leave the room.
I'm sure there has to be some amount of discomfort with pulling all that work apart, though.
No,
not really.
No, because my hands are just busy. They're just making stitches, and if it turns into something that's finished, awesome.
Yeah.
If it's usable, great. But I have finished things and gone, that was a great project. I'm never going to use this. I'm never going to wear it, but I really like the yarn.
Really?
Lined it all back up. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
I am so impressed. Honestly, like I think that's an amazing like freedom and also self-awareness to be like, yeah, I learned this thing. It was a great lesson. But you're right in the fact that yarn is unique in that way that you can basically start over at square one.
Yeah. I mean, I have friends, and I did this in our lean years.
Yeah.
You head to the thrift store and you find a really nice sweater and you unwind it so that you can use the yarn.
To make it how you want it.
Yep.
I love that.
Yep.
That's really cool. So is there someone who is in your life has been a huge inspiration to you, whether it's in knitting and crochet or just your creative path in general?
I think like a lot of older knitters. Elizabeth Zimmerman was a huge influence. Her PBS show was fantastic. I used to watch episodes of that right alongside Julia Child.
Yes.
You know, when I was growing up, and she had a really great free approach to what she did. She's like, just do what makes you happy. Just try it.
Yeah.
You know, mistakes are going to happen. You might discover the next best thing by making a mistake.
Yeah.
And in a lot of my classes and in how I teach, I often say if you've watched any of our One Big Happy episodes, I learn more from taking things apart than from doing them right the first time.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. Even on the quilting side of things, the longer I do this, the less afraid I am of making those mistakes because you realize, one, it could be a whole nother design that you didn't even know you were working on.
Yeah.
And two, it's just part of the journey.
Yep.
It's just part of the process and it's nothing to be ashamed of.
No, or to be afraid of, really.
Yeah.
If you can give yourself the grace and forgive yourself for those mistakes, because we're not born knowing everything, right? Life is a learning process.
Absolutely.
And change happens all the time. And sometimes you think, I know this, I've got it, I'm good. And then the universe throws you a curveball and you're like, okay, let's try it this way now. Yeah. And if you can just be open to that, it's a little easier.
So you mentioned One Big Happy a little bit, and people may not realize that you're now part of Missouri Star.
Yes.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So One Big Happy Yarn Company has always been a sister company to Missouri Star. But in the winter of 2024, we sort of folded in fully. It was a little bit of a rocky transition, but once we got everything sorted out, it's everything that everybody loved about One Big Happy. So it's all of the great yarns, our great patterns, our fantastic tutorials, myself, Jenny Fish, some of our guest designers coming in, which I love. I mean, I love being able to share what we do with people so that they can begin to not be so afraid and to find the right projects. And so that's all under Missouri Star Knitting and Crochet now.
Okay.
And it means that I get to do more, cross-craft projects with you.
Yes.
And with the rest of the Missouri Star team. And I get to spend even more of my time really creatively building this side of the brand. Where at One Big Happy, there was a lot more admin stuff on the backside and running a whole separate website and managing the digital advertising. And there's whole teams that handle that here at Missouri Star. So it frees me up really to think about what the future of the knitting and crochet side of Missouri Star looks like, making sure that we bring in incredible products for the customers that make me happy.
Right.
Because if I don't love it, it's hard for me to help you love it.
Absolutely.
And then just making sure that we put just the best content out there. Yeah.
I love that. And it's nice for me as someone who is still very much a beginner knitter and barely dabbled in crochet.
We're going to fix that.
I know. To know that someone of your expertise is looking at that and bringing in these great products and focusing on it, I just think is so exciting. And I know I can rely on you to not lead me astray. So I'm really, really excited to have you here on board working, arm in arm.
The feeling is mutual.
Yeah, it's great. And so you have also written some books.
Yes.
Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. So my previous job I worked at was near a small publisher called Story Publishing. And their whole focus was sustainable subjects.
Okay.
And so the books that they published, they planned on always keeping in print. And I think they're pretty close to actually doing that.
Wow.
So So they approached me because I had been teaching crochet classes for a long time, and I was sort of the expert in the area. They're like, would you like to write a book? And I was, I guess.
Yeah.
And, you know, like nobody, unless you think you're going to grow up and write the, you know, great American novel, nobody thinks I'm going to grow up and write a book. So I did. I took, you know, everything that I'd learned from those years of teaching crochet and my curriculum development degree and worked it into a great little pocket-sized book where you can just get started crocheting. And it really, there's a little bit of humor in there, so it's not really a dry textbook, but it's got a lot of great information in a little package. You can take it with you, keep it in your project bag.
How to crochet, so cute. Learn the basic stitches and techniques. I love that.
And so that book did really well, and they came back and said, would you like to do something else? And I said, well, sure. And they said, why don't you just do a pattern book? And I said, why don't I do a pattern book where I teach people how to design their own patterns?
Yeah.
And so it's sort of an empowering thing. There's, I think, 24 actual projects in the book.
Wow.
But every project also teaches you how to do your own thing.
That's really
So
neat.
how to take the yarn that you want, find a stitch that you like, swatch it, and then turn it into a hat, turn it into a cowl, turn it into a pair of socks.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if there was someone who was considering getting into this field for a career, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Find the part of it that shines the brightest for you and focus on that. So if you really love sharing yarn with people or introducing them to new yarns, find a local yarn shop.
Yeah.
Start working there, start teaching. If design is really your thing, just start.
Yeah.
Just start. There's industry standards. Nobody writes to industry standards when they start. Pick up patterns everywhere that you can. Read through them. Every designer has a different format that they put things in, and you'll begin to pick up on what the standards are within those formats. Then you can format your pattern how best brings your voice forward, but so that it's in a language that is sort of universal across patterns. If it's really just my hands don't stop and I constantly have to make it, but I don't want to have to write this down for anybody, then just make. And there's plenty of platforms out there where you can sell your work.
Yeah.
Just find the thing that, like, be a magpie. Find the thing that's shiny. Go get it.
Draws you in.
Yes, and follow it.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I know you also enjoy gardening.
I do.
So do you see any correlation between your knitting and your gardening and how meticulous or detail-oriented you are about that?
Yeah, I think I'm much freer in the garden. But I'm also not a I feel like knitting and crochet, like, I've got this, like, soup to nuts, I'm good.
Yeah.
Gardening, I'm still playing with. My sister knows much more, and so I lean on her pretty heavy. I'm like, what companion planting should I be doing? What should I have in this part of my garden? Because it's a little shady, and she, helps in to be my expert and to help out. So I'm a little more freeform with the garden. Just, I think I want flowers over there. Wouldn't it be nice to have pumpkins over here? I hope they grow.
Yeah.
and I just go with it. But I like being out there because knitting and crochet it's super portable and I can take it anywhere, but I have my comfy spot. I have my spots where I like to work. Sometimes it's in the hammock in the backyard, but mostly it's in my big comfy chair.
Yes.
So the garden gets me out of the house. It's fresh air. I get to hear all the bird song. I get a little bit of a sunburn because I've been out there. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's just a reminder. You get a little dirt under your nails. The smells in the garden, the tomato leaves. You brush past a tomato leaf and just smell it. And I don't know, I just like seeing things grow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time with my grandma when I was a young girl. She always had an incredible garden, and it's one of the things that I wish I would have asked her more questions about because I do not have that skill. I have a black thumb, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
But I'm not convinced that that's forever. It's just
maybe it's just a time thing.
I'm hoping. And luckily my husband's quite good at growing things, and so I get to enjoy a lot still. But I love being in the garden.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. I think there's something healing about spending time outside, doing work, and connecting with nature.
Yep.
And it also sort of recenters you and your focus. So I can totally relate to that.
And I was lucky enough that I spent a lot of time with my great-grandmother, and she and my great-grandfather had huge gardens. And so I got to spend time with them there. And then with my nanny, she wasn't so much of a gardener. I mean, there was always a little veggie plot and radishes galore. I love radishes.
I love them too.
But with her, there was a little more foraging. It was, let's go pick mint from the front stone wall. Let's go pick some chives from the side of the house. Oh, look, we found a patch of, lily of the valley. Yeah. Doesn't it just smell beautiful? So that's, I think, part of my love of the outdoors and the gardening.
I love that.
Comes from all of that. And then also cooking. You know, what are you going to do with all of that stuff?
Yes, that's so true.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that your family did gardening. Did any of them knit or crochet?
So there's a weird generation skip.
Okay.
So all of the knitting and crochet and sewing in my family I learned from grandparents, great-grandparents.
Okay.
I think there was, a real push in my mom's generation for, women's lib and freedom from traditional women's roles. So I learned it from the generations before.
Yeah.
My great-grandmother that had the great garden, she was a quilter. She was a hand quilter. And I have a quilt that she made for me when I was born. There's applique and it's all put together with sackcloth and, pieces of their old clothes.
I need to see this.
I will bring a picture. So in 2020, when we were all under lockdown, my cousin had her first daughter, and she had lost both of her parents and all four of her grandparents. And, we're all stuck at home.
Yeah.
And I was like, I talked to my sister. I said, we have to do something. And so my sister and I made a grandma quilt for her. So there's butterflies and sunbonnet Sue on mine. And my cousin and her fiance, very into hunting. So we did little deer faces with antlers and butterflies because they were having a little girl.
Yeah.
And so we used clothing. I contacted her sister and I said, do you happen to have any of your mom and dad's clothes? I contacted my aunts and said, do we have any of Nanny and Grampy's clothes, so that I could cut from that fabric and
be able to
make
pass
one of
that
those quilts for her. Yeah.
I think that's what's so incredible about fiber arts in general, is that you can pass some of that love and history on in ways that is really unique.
Yeah.
And how special. What a treasure. What a treasure for you in getting to do it.
Yeah.
And then for her and her sweet little baby too.
Yeah. It was really great to work on that with my sister and sort of channel our grandmother through that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I feel very fortunate because you hear the story of the skill skipping generations often, whether it's in knitting and crochet or quilting. My mom was always more of a crafter when I was young, but didn't spend a ton of time at the sewing machine, although she could sew. She's come much farther back around to it now, but I also learned from my grandma. She's the one that spent so much time teaching me and spending time and developing that love. And I feel fortunate that I have many generations who have passed that skill. And in a way, it's the one thing in my life besides photographs that connects me to that history of my family.
Isn't that crazy?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It really is. So do you have treasures from your grandma and great-grandma that have passed on?
I do. So I have the quilt that my great-grandmother made me. I have all kinds of things from my nanny. My meme taught me, my mom's stepmom actually taught me how to knit and crochet. She used to watch me a lot when I was young, and I was a pain in the butt. Yeah. And she crocheted like crazy. Everybody who had a baby in their church got a layette set and a blanket from her. Gosh. And so I was like, what are you doing, Meme? What are you doing, Meme? What are you doing? And so she finally just said, oh, fine, I'll teach you how.
Yes.
And I think I was 7. And then a couple years later, she taught me how to knit. But then I taught her how to do cross stitch years later. And then that became a huge passion of hers later in her life. And she would do these huge pieces. And when my husband and I got married, she did a huge, bride and groom piece for us that I have framed in our dining room. Yeah. So it's not always just that it comes straight down through. Sometimes it circles back around.
It has its own path, which is pretty incredible. I love that. I think it's such a unique thing to be able to celebrate and to remember while we're working that these things might be frustrating to us in the moment or part of our journey, but down the road someone might really treasure them.
Absolutely.
And man,
there is really something to like all of that love and intention in every stitch.
Absolutely.
It really is there.
And people notice it. They absolutely do. And so that's super special. And I feel it in the things that I have from my grandma and great grandma. I have some quilts from them and some dolls that my grandma made me. And they're like some of my most prized possessions. Yeah. Not only are they functional and beautiful, but they are sweet memories that are wrapped up in them. Yeah. So same.
I love a piece that has a story.
I do
that's
too.
Super meaningful. Yeah.
I love that so much. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Sara. I truly appreciate it. I love every time we get to chat. And obviously people can find you at Missouri Star Knitting and Crochet, but where else if they want to keep in touch with you?
Occasionally I'll post to my Instagram. It's chickenbetty_.
Awesome.
Yeah. That's about it. I'm there or I'm here.
Perfect.
Or I'm in the garden.
Well, we'll be tuning in for all the new tutorials.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Misty.